The morning started like every other. The smell of burnt toast, the soft hum of the heater that barely worked, and the sound of his daughter humming somewhere in the apartment. Evan Carter buttoned the collar of his only clean shirt, the one he ironed the night before with an old iron that leaked more steam than it should. He glanced at the clock on the kitchen wall. Still early, enough time to grab a cup of coffee before the train and maybe review the test questions one last time. If he passed today, he could finally move from the night shift to the day shift. The difference between missing his daughter's childhood and actually being there for it. Mia looked up from her cereal, swinging her legs beneath the chair. "You're gonna pass, right, Dad?" Evan smiled, tightening his tie. "That's the plan." He walked her to the neighbor's apartment down the hall, thanked Mrs. Patel for watching her, and promised he'd be back before dinner. Then he stepped out into the cold Queen's air, the kind that smelled faintly of metal and rain. The sky was gray, and the city was already awake. Buses sighing, horns echoing, people rushing with cups of coffee that looked too hot to hold. At the subway station, the platform was crowded, packed shoulder to shoulder. Evan stood near the yellow line, clutching his briefcase. He kept checking the time, counting the minutes. He couldn't afford to be late, not today. He took a sip from the paper cup, lukewarm and bitter, and closed his eyes for a second. In that tiny pause, the screech of metal tore through the air. A body fell. Someone had slipped. A young man in a dark coat, tumbling off the edge of the platform, his bag scattering papers across the rails. For one stunned heartbeat, nobody moved. The incoming train's lights appeared in the tunnel, bright and merciless. Then Evan dropped his coffee. He didn't think, didn't plan, he just moved. He vaulted down to the tracks, knees hitting the gravel hard, the shock biting through his legs. The man was dazed, frozen. Evan grabbed his coat, yelling for help. "Pull him up, now!" Hands reached down from the platform, a security guard, a commuter, their voices panicked, overlapping. The rails vibrated beneath Evan's boots. He shoved the man upward, felt someone grab the stranger's arm, and pushed until he was off the track. The wind hit a second later, the roar of the approaching train. Evan lunged, arms flailing, boots scraping steel. The train blared its horn. A burst of hot air slammed into him as he rolled against the wall, barely clearing the space. The noise was deafening, the air thick with dust and sparks. When it finally passed, the platform erupted in shouts. People leaned over the edge, eyes wide, pointing. Evan stayed crouched for a moment, breathing hard, heart hammering against his ribs. His palms were bleeding, his suit torn at the elbow. Someone called down, "Are you okay?" He looked up, dazed but alive. "Yeah," he managed, voice rough. "He's safe, we're both safe." 2 minutes later, transit officers pulled him back onto the platform. The young man he'd saved was crying, shaking, mumbling thank yous. People clapped, others filmed, and Evan just stood there, trying to catch his breath. He wiped his hands on his pants, nodded once to the officer, and started running. He didn't even notice the coffee stain on his sleeve or the crowd still staring. All he could think was that the test started soon. He sprinted up the station stairs, lungs burning, the city spinning around him. Traffic lights blurred red and white. He flagged a cab that never stopped, dodged a puddle, and kept running. The cold air stabbed at his throat, but he pushed harder. This was supposed to be his day, his turn, his chance to start over. But the clock was already ticking, and Evan didn't know yet that what just happened on that subway platform would change everything that came after. By the time Evan reached the building, his lungs were on fire. The street outside shimmered with glass and sunlight, the kind of downtown he rarely saw except on the way to fix something that was broken. He stopped long enough to catch his breath, wiped the dust from his jacket, and stepped into the lobby. It smelled of polished floors and coffee brewed in offices he'd never been inside. A security guard at the desk glanced up, bored and expressionless. "Morning," Evan panted, pressing his ID on the counter. "Trade test, maintenance tech position." The guard checked a clipboard, his finger tracing down a list. His voice was flat. "That started 15 minutes ago. Doors closed at 8. Evan's stomach dropped. He looked at the big clock on the wall, its second hand slicing through time like a knife. He was late. Just minutes, but in this world, minutes mattered. "Please," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There was an accident on the subway. A man fell. I helped him." "Sir," the guard cut in gently, lowering his tone. "I get it, but rules are rules. They can't hold the test for anyone. You'll have to apply again next cycle." Something in Evan's chest tightened. He could still feel the gravel on his hands, the vibration of the train rushing past his body. He had saved a man's life, and yet standing here in this bright, clean lobby, he felt smaller than ever. A few people in line behind him shifted impatiently. One of them, a man in a crisp shirt with a company badge, muttered just loud enough for Evan to hear, "If he's late for a test, imagine him fixing alarms." Laughter followed, not loud, just sharp enough to sting. Evan nodded slowly, forcing out a small breath. Right, understood. He turned and walked out before his voice could betray him. Outside, the wind had picked up. It carried the scent of exhaust and roasted nuts from a street cart nearby. He stopped under the awning of a coffee shop, leaned against the wall, and let the morning rush move around him. People heading to work, suits tapping on phones, the kind of confidence that came from never having to beg for a second chance. He checked his reflection in the window, a small tear on his sleeve, a stain down his shirt where the coffee had splashed, dried blood along his knuckles. He looked like someone who'd already failed. Pulling out his phone, he typed an email to the company contact listed on the job posting. His thumbs hovered over the screen. There was an emergency on the subway. He deleted it, typed again, deleted again. What was he supposed to say? That doing the right thing had made him late? That he wasn't irresponsible, just unlucky? He slid the phone back into his pocket and stared at the traffic light across the street, blinking from green to red. The city didn't care, it never did. By the time he got back on the subway, the morning crowd had thinned. He sat by the window, the same hands that had pulled a stranger off the tracks now trembling in his lap. His reflection looked hollow, like he'd left part of himself on that platform. When he finally reached Queens, the noise faded, home smelled like laundry detergent and the faint sweetness of Mia's crayons. She was sitting on the couch, still in her pajamas, legs tucked under a blanket, watching cartoons. She turned the moment she heard the door. "Dad, how'd it go? Did you pass?" Evan froze in the doorway, his briefcase still in his hand. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not today, sweetheart." Her face fell. "But, you'll get another chance, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'll get another one." He said it softly, like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Mia slid off the couch and hugged him around the waist. Her head reached just below his chest now. "You're still my hero," she mumbled. Evan closed his eyes for a second, resting his chin on her hair. The warmth of her hug burned against the cold that had settled inside him. He didn't tell her about the crowd that had laughed, or the guard who said no, or how small he'd felt standing in a place where rules mattered more than people. He just held her tighter and whispered, "Thanks, kiddo." That night, after Mia was asleep, he sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the crumpled job flyer. He could still see the man's terrified face on the tracks, the blur of the train, the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. He'd done the right thing, he knew that, but the right thing didn't pay rent, the right thing didn't buy groceries, the right thing didn't fix the heater that groaned every time the temperature dropped. He rubbed his palms together, feeling the roughness of dried blood. Then he whispered to himself, barely loud enough for the empty room to hear, "I'd still do it again." And somewhere deep down, he hoped that maybe just maybe, the universe had been watching. The days after the accident blurred together. Evan went back to work at the warehouse, fixing flickering lights and unclogging drains the same way he always had. Nothing about his life looked different, except for the bandage on his hand and the ache in his shoulder that woke him every night. On the third morning, his supervisor, Rick, stopped him by the supply closet. "You're famous," Rick said with a half smile. Evan frowned. "What?" Rick held up his phone. On the screen was a grainy video, the kind someone records in a rush. You could barely see faces, just a man in a gray jacket pulling another off the subway tracks as the train thundered by. The caption read, "Subway hero saves commuter in Midtown." Evan blinked. "That's not..." Rick laughed. "Oh, it's you, man. Look at the way you run. Nobody else moves like that." He slapped Evan on the shoulder and walked away, leaving him staring at the screen. The video had a few thousand views already. By lunchtime, it was on a local news site. Reporters used words like bravery, split-second decision, and everyday hero. At home, Mia saw it on the evening news. Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "That's you, Dad. You saved that man." Evan smiled faintly. "Guess so." She jumped on the couch, cheering. "You're famous. Maybe they'll give you a medal." But by the end of the week, the city had moved on. Another headline had replaced his. A mayoral scandal, a celebrity breakup, something about the stock market. The subway rescue was just a memory in a sea of stories people would forget before they even finished scrolling. Evan didn't mind, he wasn't looking for applause, but every time he rode that same train, he couldn't help glancing at the tracks, at the spot where his life had split in two. One night, as he was clocking out, his phone buzzed with a message from the company that had hosted the test he missed. "Thank you for your interest in our maintenance technician position. Unfortunately, we've moved forward with another candidate." He read it twice, then slid the phone back into his pocket. The warehouse was quiet except for the hum of the vending machine. He stood there for a while, staring at the blinking numbers, trying not to think about how close he'd been. When he got home, the apartment was dark except for the faint light of the television. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch again, her coloring book open beside her. She'd drawn him, stick-figure arms outstretched, standing on the subway tracks. At the top, she'd written in big, uneven letters, "My hero dad." He smiled, a small, tired smile, and gently lifted her into bed. He tucked the blanket under her chin and stood there for a moment, just watching her breathe. Later that night, he sat by the window, listening to the city outside. Cars passed, somewhere a siren wailed, the radiator hissed like it was trying to talk. He opened his laptop, an old one that took forever to start, and typed maintenance job openings in Queens. The list was long, most of them paying barely enough to survive. Still, he applied to 3, then 4, sending the same resume, the same hope. He didn't tell anyone about the missed test anymore. When people asked about the subway rescue, he just said, "My right place, right time," and left it at that. But deep down, he wondered if doing the right thing had cost him more than he could afford. Then, one evening, as he was locking up the warehouse, the security guard handed him an envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you earlier," the man said. It was plain, with his name written neatly across the front. Inside was a small note, no return address, no signature. Sometimes the world doesn't thank you right away, but it remembers. Evan read it twice, turning it over in his hands. There was nothing else inside, just the words, simple, quiet. He slipped the note into his wallet next to a photo of Mia holding a paper trophy she'd made in school. Outside, the night air felt colder, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't mind. He walked toward the train station, his breath visible in the streetlight glow. The city had forgotten his name, but maybe just maybe, it hadn't forgotten him. A month passed, the days grew colder, and the mornings darker. Evan's routine stayed the same: wake up before sunrise, heat water for instant coffee, get Mia ready for school, and leave for another long day that looked just like the one before it. But on a Thursday afternoon, as he was repairing a leaking pipe under the loading dock, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number, he almost ignored it. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice said when he answered. "This is from the mayor's community office. We'd like to invite you to the City Service Awards next week. You were nominated for your actions on the subway." Evan wiped his hands on his work pants, unsure he'd heard right. "You mean the thing a month ago?"
"Yes," she said warmly. "We try not to let good deeds go unnoticed."
He didn't know what to say. All he could manage was, "I'll be there." That night, he told Mia during dinner. She squealed so loudly, the neighbor's dog started barking through the wall.
"You're gonna get a medal, Dad," she said, eyes wide. "Like a real one?"
Evan laughed softly. "I don't think it's that kind of medal." "I don't care," she said, reaching across the table to grab his hand. "You deserve it." For the first time in weeks, he let himself smile without pretending. The ceremony was held in a modest hall inside the city building, not far from the same streets where he'd once sprinted, late and desperate. There were no flashing cameras or reporters this time, just folding chairs, a podium, and a banner that read, "Honoring Everyday Heroes of New York." Evan sat near the back, feeling awkward in the same jacket he'd worn to that missed test. Mia was next to him, dressed in her best sweater, holding a tiny bouquet she'd bought with her allowance. One by one, names were called. Firefighters, teachers, a nurse who'd helped a neighbor during a blackout. When they said Evan Carter for bravery and quick action during a subway emergency, he froze for a second before standing.
The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real, and for Evan, that was enough.
As he walked to the stage, he caught sight of someone near the front row. A woman with dark hair pulled neatly back, wearing a simple gray suit. She was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. When he shook hands with the council member presenting the award, he noticed the woman stand and step toward the aisle, clapping softly. After the ceremony, while people milled around chatting and taking pictures, the woman approached him. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "Lena Torres, I work with the city comptroller's office." Her voice was calm, professional, but her eyes carried something else, something like recognition. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued. "Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people freeze, you didn't." Evan shrugged lightly, didn't really think, just reacted. "That's what makes it rare," she said. "You didn't think about what it would cost you." He smiled faintly, not sure how to respond. "Well, it did cost me something. Missed a test that day, probably my best shot at a better job." Lena's face softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." She hesitated, then added quietly, "You know, sometimes doing the right thing pays you back in ways you don't expect." He nodded politely, though part of him didn't believe it. Still, something about her tone made him pause.
Lena reached into her bag and handed him a small envelope. "This isn't charity," she said. It's an invitation.
Our office partners with the city's workforce program. They sponsor night classes for skilled trades, HVAC systems, electrical, automation. You should apply. You already have the instincts, the rest is just training." Evan looked down at the envelope, the bold letters printed across the top. Workforce Development Program, application materials enclosed. "I wouldn't even know where to start," he said. "Start here," Lena replied, "and show up, that's all that matters." Before he could thank her, she was called away to speak with another group. Evan stood there for a while, holding the envelope, watching her walk off. Mia tugged on his sleeve. "Who was that, Dad?" He smiled at his daughter. "I think someone who believes I still have a shot." As they stepped outside, snowflakes drifted down from a dull gray sky. Mia ran ahead, trying to catch them on her tongue. Evan looked down at the envelope again, the paper already damp from melting snow. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel stuck. He didn't feel forgotten. He just felt seen. And neither he nor the woman who'd handed him that envelope could have known. That small act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. The envelope sat on the kitchen table for 2 days before Evan opened it. He kept glancing at it every time he walked by. Between packing lunches, fixing the leaky faucet, and folding laundry that never seemed to end. It looked out of place in their small apartment, too official, too full of possibility. On the third night, while Mia was doing homework at the table, he finally tore it open. Inside were a few pages, an information sheet about the city's workforce program, a list of evening courses, and a short note on plain white paper. "Mr. Carter, your tuition has been pre-approved for the HVAC and Building Automation Certification Program. Classes begin in January. Attendance required. Workforce Development Division." Evan blinked. Pre-approved? He hadn't applied for anything yet. He turned the paper over, looking for a name, a contact, anything. There was none. Just an address for the training center and a starting date. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a quiet laugh, half disbelief, half relief. Mia looked up. "What's funny?" "Nothing," he said, smiling, looks like Dad's going back to school. Her eyes went wide. "You mean like a real school with homework and everything?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Exactly that." That night, after she fell asleep, Evan sat by the window, the city lights blinking through the thin curtains. He didn't know who had pulled the strings or how his tuition had been covered. Maybe it was Lena. Maybe the city had programs for people like him. Either way, it didn't matter. He'd been given a door, and this time he was going to walk through it. The first week of class hit harder than he expected. Most of the students were younger, some fresh out of high school, others looking for a way out of dead-end jobs. Evan felt like the old man in the room, the one with tired eyes and work boots covered in dust. He spent his evenings hunched over a desk in a borrowed classroom at a community center in Long Island City, learning about thermostats, compressors, and wiring diagrams that looked more like spiderwebs than lessons. During breaks, he'd step outside into the cold, calling Mia to say goodnight. She'd always ask the same thing, "What did you learn today, Dad?" And he'd always answer, "How to make things work again." Some nights, the words almost caught in his throat, because that was exactly what he was trying to do. There were times he wanted to quit. After 10 hours at work, his back ached, his eyes burned, and the words on the page swam like static, but he remembered the subway, the people who'd stared, the laughter at the security desk, the job he'd never gotten. This time he promised himself he wouldn't be late. Weeks turned into months. His notes grew thicker, his confidence steadier. The instructors began to notice. One of them, an older man named Raphael, pulled him aside after class one night. "You got good hands," Raphael said, nodding toward the control panel Evan had just wired. "Not everyone does." Evan chuckled. "I've been fixing things most of my life, just never thought it could mean something bigger." Raphael smiled. "It does, you just needed someone to see it." Evan didn't say it out loud, but he knew exactly who that someone might be. A few weeks later, while cleaning out his work locker, he found another envelope tucked under the edge of his toolbox. Inside was a simple note. "Proud of your progress, keep going. The hard part is temporary, the result isn't." No signature, no address, just those words, and a small city pin attached to the corner, the same kind worn by employees at the comptroller's office. He stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a love note or charity or a favor, it was something rarer, quiet belief. He pinned the note to the inside of his locker door next to Mia's drawing of him on the subway tracks. Every time exhaustion crept in, he'd read it once more before clocking out, letting the words echo through the noise of his day. The hard part is temporary. It was enough to keep him moving. And somewhere across the city, in an office full of paperwork and flickering monitors, Lina Torres glanced at a file with his name on it and smiled, knowing he was exactly where he needed to be. But Evan didn't know that yet. He only knew that for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something that happened to him. It felt like something he was finally building, one night class at a time. Winter gave way to spring, though Evan barely noticed. The world outside changed colors. Snow turned to slush, then to puddles reflecting city lights, but his life was a loop of work, class, and exhaustion. Every morning started the same: the alarm at 5, the quiet apartment, the sound of Mia's steady breathing from her room. He'd make coffee that never tasted quite right, lace up his boots, and head out before dawn. By day, he fixed pipes, replaced filters, and patched whatever the old building threw at him. By night, he became a student again, sitting in a cramped classroom under flickering fluorescent lights, scribbling notes while his eyelids fought to stay open.
It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress.
On weekends, Mia would curl up beside him on the couch, using his arm as a pillow while he studied. Sometimes she'd trace the lines of a wiring diagram with her finger, pretending to understand. "So this," she'd say, pointing at the mess of symbols, "is how air gets cold." He'd laugh. Something like that. She'd nod thoughtfully. "Then you're learning how to make summer better." He never thought of it that way, but she was right. He wasn't just fixing machines, he was He was learning how to make life run a little smoother. There were setbacks, of course. Times when the subway ran late and he missed the first half of class. Days when bills piled up faster than he could pay them, and nights when loneliness hit harder than fatigue, the kind that crept in when the world was quiet and everyone else seemed to be moving forward. But he kept going. Raphael, the instructor, noticed. One evening after class, he said, "You remind me of someone I used to teach," had the same look in his eyes, determined but tired. Evan smiled faintly. Tired's accurate. Raphael chuckled. "The good kind of tired means you're doing something that matters." That night, Evan walked home with a strange kind of peace. The city buzzed around him, car horns, food carts, laughter spilling from bars, bom. But inside there was quiet, a steady kind of purpose. Months passed, and the classes grew more advanced. Evan started staying late to help clean up the workshop, double-checking his wiring projects. Some of the younger students began asking him for help. "Hey Carter," one of them said, "how do you make the compressor stop tripping the breaker?" Evan grinned. "Treat it like a person, figure out what's stressing it out." The kid laughed, but it worked. Word spread that he was the guy who could fix anything, not because he was the smartest, but because he never gave up. One evening, as he was packing up, Raphael called him over. "Got a minute?" Evan nodded. Raphael handed him a form. "There's a summer apprenticeship opening with a city energy program. It's not glamorous, but it pays better than what you're doing now. You've earned it." Evan stared at the paper. "I don't know if I'm ready." Raphael smiled. "Nobody ever is. That's how you know it's worth it." He took the form home, folded neatly in his jacket pocket. At the kitchen table, he filled it out slowly while Mia colored beside him. When he was done, she looked up and said, "What's that?" "A new job, maybe," he said. "One that could help us move forward." Her eyes lit up. "Can we get a place with real heat this time?" He laughed softly. "That's the goal." The apprenticeship started in late June. The hours were long, but the work was different. Real experience, real systems. He learned how to monitor energy use in city buildings, how to measure airflow, how to fix things most people didn't even know existed. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel stuck. One afternoon, as he was reviewing data in the office, he noticed a familiar name at the bottom of an internal memo. Lina Torres, Deputy Counsel, Comptroller's Office. He paused, smiling to himself. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe she'd had a hand in this opportunity too. Either way, he wasn't going to waste it. That night, he stayed late, finishing a report everyone else had given up on. When he finally left, the building was quiet, the air thick with summer rain. He walked home in it, knowing, no umbrella, no rush. The rain felt good, clean, like it was washing off the years of disappointment he'd been carrying. When he got home, Mia was waiting by the window, her hair messy from sleep. "You're drenched," she said. Evan laughed, shaking the water from his jacket. Yeah, but I passed the inspection. She smiled. Told you you'd make it. He sat beside her on the couch, looking out at the city lights flickering through the rain. The same city that once looked too big, too cold, now felt like it was finally letting him in. And though he didn't know it yet, the person who had quietly opened that first door for him was still watching from afar, waiting to see how far he could go on his own before fate decided to bring them face to face again. By the time fall rolled around again, Evan had settled into a rhythm he never thought possible. His mornings were calm now, coffee that didn't taste like rust, heat that actually worked, and the sound of Mia's laughter as she got ready for school. They'd moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery in Astoria. The smell of fresh bread drifted through their window every morning, and sometimes the owner slipped Mia a free muffin on her way out the door. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Work had become something more than survival. He wasn't just fixing things anymore, he was improving them, making old systems run smoother, saving energy, cutting costs. The city's energy department had started to notice. One Thursday afternoon, Raphael stopped by his worksite with a folded flyer in hand. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, handing it over. It was a job posting for a facilities and energy analyst position, permanent, full-time, with benefits. It described everything Evan had been learning over the past 2 years: system audits, automation controls, energy optimization. The salary at the bottom made him blink twice. "I'm not qualified," Evan said quietly. Raphael smirked. "You sure about that? Sounds like they're describing you." Evan read the line again. Minimum requirement, HVAC certification, and 2 years of related field experience. He met both for the first time he did. That night, after Mia had gone to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He stared at the application form for a long time before finally typing his name. When he reached the section that asked, "Why do you want this position?" he hesitated, then wrote, "Because I know what it's like to fix things people have given up on. And I don't stop until they work again." He hit send before he could talk himself out of it. 2 weeks later, an email arrived. "We're pleased to invite you for an interview for the Facilities and Energy Analyst position with the City Comptroller's office." Evan read it 3 times, afraid it might vanish if he blinked. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. When he told Mia that night, she hugged him so hard he nearly dropped his plate. "You're gonna get it, Dad," she said, grinning. "You always do." He laughed, but his hands trembled just a little. He remembered the last time he'd stood in a lobby like that, sweaty palms, pounding heart, and a clock that didn't wait for anyone. This time, he promised himself he'd be early. The morning of the interview, the city felt different. The sun was warm, the air crisp. He wore the same charcoal gray suit he'd worn years ago, cleaned, pressed, and fitted this time. The elbows still showed wear, but he didn't mind. It told a story.
He arrived 30 minutes early, checked in with security, and waited in the lobby. The guard, an older man with a mustache, looked up from his clipboard. "You're here for the analyst position?" "Yes, sir." The man smiled. "Good luck, son. You're the first one here."
Evan nodded, a small, steady pride settling in his chest. A young assistant led him upstairs to a conference room. The walls were lined with framed city maps and faded blueprints. Sunlight spilled across the long table. There were 3 people inside. One was an older gentleman from facilities management, another, a middle-aged woman typing briskly on a laptop, and then, sitting at the end of the table, was Lena Torres. She looked up as the door opened, and for a moment her face softened in surprise. Then she smiled. Calm, professional, but warm. "Mr. Carter," she said, "it's good to see you again." Evan froze for a half-second, then returned the smile. "Likewise, Ms. Torres. Thank you for having me." He took his seat, careful not to let the nerves show. The interview began, questions about system audits, energy benchmarks, equipment lifespan projections. He answered each one carefully, drawing from everything he'd learned. When they asked about his experience managing limited budgets, he spoke about making repairs with recycled parts, about saving energy without spending a fortune. When Lena asked, "What drives you to do this kind of work?" he didn't pause. "My daughter," he said simply. "She's the reason I keep learning. Every time something breaks, I fix it, because if I can fix things for her, maybe I can fix a little more of the world too." The room went quiet for a second. Then the older man nodded slowly, impressed. By the time the interview ended, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years, calm confidence. As he stood to leave, Lena extended her hand. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "So have you," he replied, smiling faintly. "Thank you for the envelope, and for seeing something in me when I couldn't." She looked at him for a moment, surprised. "You knew it was me?"
He nodded. "I had a feeling."
A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Pride, maybe gratitude. "Then I'm glad I was right." As he left the room, sunlight hit the hallway just right, warm, golden, and bright. Evan exhaled, shoulders relaxing. Whatever happened next, he knew he'd done something no one could take away from him. He'd shown up, prepared, on time, and ready. And though he didn't know it yet, that morning would mark the beginning of a future far brighter than the one he'd once lost. For 3 days, Evan couldn't stop checking his phone. Every time it buzzed, every time an email alert popped up, his pulse jumped a little. And every time it wasn't the one he was waiting for, the hope dimmed just a bit. By Friday morning, he told himself to let it go. He'd done everything he could. Whatever came next wasn't in his hands. He was at work when the message finally arrived. The subject line read, "Employment offer, City Comptroller's office." For a moment, he just stared at the screen. His hands trembled as he clicked it open. "Dear Mr. Carter, we are pleased to offer you the position of Facilities and Energy Analyst with the City Comptroller's office." He read it again, then a third time. His breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Raphael noticed from across the workshop. "Well?" he asked, leaning on the doorframe. Evan turned his screen around, smiling wider than he had in years. "I got it." Raphael grinned. "I knew you would." That night, Evan took Mia to their favorite diner, the one with the squeaky booths and milkshakes that came in tall silver cups. He ordered her pancakes even though it wasn't breakfast time, and she didn't question it. "You got the job, didn't you?" she said with a grin, syrup already on her chin. He laughed. "Yeah, kiddo, I did." She clapped her hands. "Does that mean we're rich now?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not rich, but stable. That's even better." Mia nodded, pretending to understand, and raised her milkshake. "To my dad, Fong Xiao, the fixer of everything." He raised his coffee cup. "To my girl, the reason I kept going." For once, the weight in his chest wasn't worry, it was pride. The following week, he reported to his new office, a quiet floor overlooking the East River. The view wasn't the important part, but he stood there for a moment anyway, watching the sunlight ripple on the water. A knock on the door pulled him back. Lena stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like the good kind," she said, smiling. He took the cup, still slightly stunned. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." "I work here, remember?" she said lightly, then nodded toward his desk. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," he admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me it's a mistake." "It's not," she said softly, "like, you earned this, Evan. The panel made their decision without me. I stepped out before the vote."
He looked at her, surprised. "You did?"
She nodded. "I wanted it to be fair. I wanted you to know this wasn't a favor. You were the top candidate by a mile." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city noise outside filled the silence. Distant traffic, the hum of life continuing. Finally, Evan said quietly, "I don't even know how to thank you." "You already did," Lena said. "You took the chance, you did the work, that's thanks enough." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "When I met you, I thought the best part of my life had already happened. Turns out it was just getting started." Lena returned the smile, warmth flickering in her eyes. "You know, when we met at that ceremony, I saw something familiar in you."
"What's that?"
"The way you looked at your daughter. My dad used to look at me like that," she said, her voice softening. "He missed a promotion once because he left work to take care of me during an asthma attack. The company let him go. He never regretted it, but he carried that moment for the rest of his life. I think that's why I noticed you that day, because you reminded me of him." Evan's throat tightened. "Sounds like he was a good man." "He was," she said, smiling faintly. "He taught me that doing the right thing might slow you down, but it never really sets you back. It just reroutes you somewhere better." Evan nodded slowly. "Then I guess I finally understand that." They stood there for a moment, two people bound by choices that had once cost them something but had brought them both exactly where they needed to be.
Finally, Lena straightened and said, "Welcome to the team, Mr. Carter."
He grinned. "Happy to be here, Ms. Torres." As she walked out, Evan turned back to the window. The river glimmered in the afternoon sun, and for the first time, he felt like the city wasn't something to survive. It was something he was finally a part of. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the old note he'd carried for years. The one that said, "Sometimes the world doesn't thank you right away, but it remembers." He smiled, folding it carefully, and slipped it back in place. Because now he knew, the world really had remembered. The weeks that followed felt different, almost unreal. For the first time in years, Evan didn't wake up with that familiar knot in his stomach, the one that came from wondering how much longer he could keep everything together. He had a steady job now, one that paid enough to cover the rent without juggling due dates. He'd even opened a small savings account, something he hadn't done since before Mia was born. It wasn't much, but it felt like a promise. A quiet start. Mia noticed the change too. She started humming again in the mornings, packing her backpack with new pencils and a lunch that didn't come from the discount aisle. Some nights she'd sit at the kitchen table doing homework while Evan went over maintenance reports beside her. The rhythm of their life was simple, and that simplicity felt like luxury. One Saturday morning, Evan took her to a park by the river, the same one he used to pass on his way to night classes. The air smelled like cut grass and street food, and the sound of kids laughing echoed off the water. Mia ran ahead, her ponytail bouncing as she joined a group playing soccer. Evan sat on a bench, coffee in hand, watching her run. Every shout, every laugh, it felt like payment for all the years he'd spent holding on by his fingertips. A familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. "She's good," Lena said, sitting down beside him. He turned, surprised but not entirely. "Hey," he said with a smile, "you stalking my weekends now?" She laughed softly. "Maybe just doing a quality check on our newest analyst." He smiled, shaking his head. "Still feels strange hearing that word, analyst. I spent half my life turning wrenches, now I spend it reading charts." "You earned that shift," she said, "and you still fix things, just in a different way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Mia chase the ball downfield. "Funny," Lena said after a moment. "The morning I met you, I thought I was just attending another ceremony. Something routine, something polite. I didn't expect to meet someone who'd remind me why I do this job." Evan looked over at her. "And what job is that?" "The job of finding people who deserve a chance," she said quietly. "People who don't ask for favors, just a fair shot." He didn't respond right away. The breeze off the river carried the sound of children laughing, the hum of traffic, the faint clink of a passing bicycle bell. "Can I tell you something?" he said finally. "Of course. Back when I missed that test," he began, "I thought I'd ruined everything. I came home and told my daughter I'd just have to keep trying, but I didn't really believe it. I felt stuck, like the world had already decided who I was." He paused, exhaling slowly. "But then you handed me that envelope and I started believing again. Just a little. You didn't give me a job, you gave me time, space to become someone worth the job." Lena's eyes softened. "You were always worth it, Evan. You just needed a mirror." They watched the kids play for a moment longer, then Mia waved from the field, calling out, "Dad, did you see that? I scored!" Evan stood and cupped his hands around his mouth. "I saw it. That's my girl." Lena smiled. "She's a lot like you." He turned to her. "God, I hope so. She deserves better than the man I used to be." "Maybe," Lena said gently, "but she's got the man you are now. That's what matters." They shared a quiet smile, the kind that doesn't need more words.
When the game ended, Mia ran over, breathless and beaming. "Did you see me kick it? It went right in."
Evan knelt, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You were amazing." Lena crouched beside them. "Hi there, I'm Lena." Mia grinned. "You work with my dad, right? The one who sends him too many emails?" Evan laughed, guilty as charged. Lena smiled. "Well, I just wanted to say, your dad's one of the good ones. You should be proud." "I already am," Mia said proudly, slipping her small hand into her father's. Evan squeezed it, feeling the warmth of her fingers against his calloused palm. That simple touch said everything. They all stood there for a moment. Three people whose lives had once crossed by accident but had somehow become tangled in something larger than luck. The sun was dipping low now, painting the sky gold. Mia tugged her father's hand. "Can we get ice cream?" Evan smiled. "Yeah, let's do that." Lena stood. "Mind if I join you?" He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "I'd like that." As they walked together toward the vendor, the city hummed around them, loud, imperfect, alive. And for the first time, Evan realized the noise didn't bother him anymore. It sounded like belonging. Autumn came early that year, the trees along the river turned gold, and the air smelled of roasted peanuts and rain-soaked pavement. Evan had grown to love that smell, the scent of a city that kept moving no matter what it had been through. Life had steadied into something gentle. His workdays were long but purposeful. He spent his mornings reviewing reports and his afternoons walking through old buildings, inspecting air systems, and talking with maintenance crews who reminded him of the man he used to be. Sometimes he'd catch himself smiling at the memory. The nights he'd spent falling asleep over textbooks, the mornings when every dollar mattered, the subway roar that had nearly swallowed him whole. All of it felt like another lifetime, yet it lived quietly inside him, shaping every choice he made. Mia was growing fast. She'd started middle school that fall, her backpack nearly as big as she was. Every morning, she'd leave him a note on the counter before school, little doodles, reminders, sometimes just the words, "Love you, Dad." He kept every single one. One Friday evening, as the sun dipped low, he and Lena met at the same park by the river where their paths had once crossed again. She brought coffee, he brought donuts. They sat on the same bench, comfortable in the kind of silence that only exists between people who have already said what matters. "You ever think about that morning?" Lena asked softly. Evan looked out at the water, the reflection of city lights shimmering across it. "Every day," he said. "Not in a bad way, it just reminds me how close life can come to going the other way." She nodded. "Funny thing, isn't it? The way a single moment can rewrite everything that comes after." He smiled. "Yeah, I used to think luck was what decided everything, but now I think maybe luck's just the name we give to hard choices that turned out okay." Lena tilted her head, smiling. "That's one way to put it." He took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle. "You know, I used to wish I could go back and change that day. Make the train a minute late or the fall never happen, but now I wouldn't. Because it led you here," she said quietly. He nodded. "Because it showed me who I was when it counted." For a while, neither spoke. The city hummed around them, alive and endless. Then Lena said, "I think people like you remind this city that goodness still exists, quiet, ordinary goodness that doesn't make headlines but holds everything together." Evan smiled at that, humbled. "I don't know about that, I just did what anyone should have done." She looked at him with a knowing expression. "That's the thing, Evan, most people would have thought twice." He didn't answer, just looked out at the river again, the breeze carrying the faint sound of laughter from somewhere down the path. After a moment, he said, When I was younger, I used to think success was about money, but, about never struggling again, but now, I think success is just being able to sit here and know my daughter's okay, that I kept my promise."
Lena turned to him. "Promise?"
He smiled softly. "Before my wife passed, she made me promise I'd give Mia every chance we never had. For a long time, I thought I was failing that promise, but I think I finally kept it." Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "You did." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared completely, the city lights flickering on one by one, windows, signs, street lamps, each one a small act of defiance against the dark. Evan breathed in deeply, the cool air filling his lungs. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something, he was already living it. After a while, he stood. "I should get going. Mia's waiting. It's movie night."
Lena smiled. "Tell her I said hi."
"I will." As he walked away, he looked back once. She was still sitting there, watching the water, the same faint smile on her face. And for a brief moment, Evan thought of that morning years ago. The scream, the fall, the sound of the train. Back then, he'd thought his life had fallen apart. Now he understood it had only been rearranged. That night, after Mia fell asleep on the couch, Evan sat at the window with a mug of tea watching the city lights. He pulled out an old piece of paper from his wallet, wrinkled, fading, but still legible. "Sometimes the world doesn't thank you right away, but it remembers." He smiled, folded it back, and whispered to the quiet apartment. It remembered. Outside, the city moved, fast, loud, and alive, but inside, everything was still. He looked over at Mia, asleep beneath a blanket, her small hand resting on her book. And he thought, maybe that's what it means to truly fix something. Not to make it perfect, just to make it work again. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything in the moment, but if you stay patient, if you keep working and keep your heart steady, the world will find a way to repay you in its own time. Question for the audience: do you believe that doing good always finds its way back, even if it takes years? See you in the next story here on Inspire Fathers Who, where everyday dads remind us what real strength looks like.